But once I give that, okay, once I give that, then it works. So that's good. Does it let me download it? Okay, it lets me download. It's very slow, but it lets me download it. Okay. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll download them and then upload them on the files part of the of our class and Teams. So fingers crossed that should work, I think. Yeah. So sorry for that being a bit problematic, but I think we will get it there. So I can see a hand being raised, Georgia.
Yes, Professor. Sorry, just a quick question.
Sure.
Where can I find the slide of the lessons? Because I saw that they are not on Virtuale and neither in the file page of Teams.
Okay, okay, neither of the two. Okay, that's funny. Oh God.
Because once you send like a PDF of the first set of slides on a chat, and I download
it. I haven't seen the other.
The others, no. Maybe it's my problem.
No, you know what? I'm realizing some things might not be one person's problems. I think it seems that we're having various technical issues with what I'm doing. So let me just take another look, and maybe I can share it directly with you right now in the chat. Maybe that's a way to make sure that everybody gets it.
Okay, thank you.
So let me just do it right now, because I think it's important at least that you get it. So that would be. So you have the first one, I'm sure, all of you. So it really is the energy trade and data sources that you don't have, I think. So if I share it with you now in the chat, it should show up very soon now. Can you see, did something appear in your chat? Hopefully.
Yes.
Good, 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 good. Okay, so at least you have that. So maybe the chat is the most reliable. That's quite funny. Okay. At least it's real time, so I know when you say that you get it. Okay, that we have it working. Okay. So with that out of the way, and while you're all downloading that, we're not going to be using these slides because we've done them already. Yeah? So it's job done with them, but at least you have them for your records. So the important thing now would be for me to ask you, how are you guys doing with your coursework? I haven't heard much from you recently, so I mean recently means during the weekend. So I thought I would check that everything is okay and everybody's working happily on it. Or is it that you're all too busy and you're not working on it at all? What's happening? Tell me.
So, Professor, just to clarify, the only deliverable is the 3,000-word paper with the data appendix.
Correct.
Is that true?
That is absolutely true, yeah. There's nothing else that you need to do. I mean, in the past, when we were doing these classes, it feels like a long time ago, when we were doing these classes face-to-face and the class was a lot smaller, so we used to have something like 20, 30, 40 people in the class. It was the case that we were doing also presentations, like small group presentations in the last day. But of course, having this going online and with the cohort becoming so large as it is now, we're putting now more emphasis on the on your report and nothing else. So I think, that's probably for the better. I think it makes things a little bit simpler overall. So if I were to see now. Okay, so the slides are just uploaded. now appear as well in the files section of the energy decarbonization and the transition to net zero. So they're stored there. You can, and hopefully you can access them whenever you like. I don't know. I hope so. Having said that, let me see if I can do the same with our class, because I promised I would do that. So that's the 27th. So we're missing the classes of Monday 27th and Wednesday 29th, if I understand this correctly. So I've just started uploading that, but it's that, I mean, that's the 27th of September class, but it will take a bit of time because it's an enormous file. So in the meanwhile, can I get back to you? So regarding your coursework, have we got any issues, any questions you guys want to ask, anything we need to clarify before you move on or whatever? Or is it all sorted and you're all happily working on it?
I have a question.
Please, yes.
I found a master thesis of a guy in Swedish, and I'd like to know if I can use it, because it's a master thesis of a former student, so it's not a researcher or a professor.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's a lot of material out there which is similar to a master thesis. It's less authoritative than other stuff. So, for example, you know, you will get things, I don't know, a newspaper article. It's not, you know, it's not peer reviewed. You know, a journalist wrote it, and very often it's rubbish. A master thesis, well, it can be maybe a little bit better, but again, not always. So I would say, I mean, in the same way that I would accept referencing from a newspaper article, I would accept referencing from a master thesis, but I would also encourage you to, you know, have more things than just that. So if that's just, you know, one of your 20 references, that's fine. But don't make it, you know, that all of your thesis relies on, that all of your report relies on one thing. Yeah. So, because then it's very dangerous. If that person is just talking nonsense, then you will end up talking nonsense. So I would try to have, as you know, many sources as possible and show a balance there.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Newspaper, can we use The Economist? It's kind of...
Yeah, The Economist is even a little bit better than your average newspaper.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else with any such?
Yes, I sent you an email in which I gave you 3 possible countries, and wanted to know if they are already taken or
that's interesting. Why did you email me? Because that is interesting. Because so I've never responded to you, Eva.
Yeah, you responded once asking me if it was for a thesis or for what, and I answered you that it was for this course, for the coursework. Yeah.
Let me see that. Because in my kind of book here, I don't have any unanswered emails, so I have
Actually, I sent you an email as well on Friday regarding the course.
When did you send it? Wait, when did you send it? Friday, okay,
yeah.
Guys. So is that all in my UNIBO address?
Yes.
Okay. Then, okay. I have to say, Eva, I have nothing from you.
Okay, so I will try to...
if you can just resend it, that would be the best.
Resend it, okay.
If you can use my UNIBO address, normally it works. I'm just trying to see if there's any chance it went on the spam, but that's... I don't even know what my spam is. How do I find my spam here? It's all in Italian. Is it posta in desiderata?
Yes.
Yeah, that's spam. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me go there. Obviously, I've never been there before. There's lots of stuff in there, but I have no idea if that's actually spam or not. Okay. Hopefully none of your emails ends up in there, but I mean, do many of you have problems with sending me emails and me not responding? Because I have been trying to be as fast as possible.
For me, it was the first time on Friday, but didn't receive an answer.
So sorry, because I'm not seeing who that is. Is it Filippo?
Yes.
Okay. Filippo, can you please? So maybe let me do it like that. So for both of you, if you can please send it both at my Unibo. So send it at Constandi. What is it? Chalvagis, Unibo. Oh, here it is. Unibo IT. But also make CC at k.halvazis UK. Yeah, can you send to both of them, please?
Perfect. I will do it now.
Just to make sure, because it's really unfortunate. Because I was under the impression I have responded to everything, so
okay.
I don't want you guys have to wait for my responses. I think it's important that we move fast with these things. So I have another couple of emails from yesterday, but okay, that was from Sunday, so I think I'm allowed Sunday off. But yeah, the other ones I cannot see. Okay. Okay, we'll sort it out. I promise. This will be sorted out today. So, in the meanwhile, anything else with your coursework?
Yeah, I had a question about the percentage of the paper you want to be sort of original analysis based on the data that we find, and then the percentage you want to be based on studies we find analyzing the specific energy form that we're focused upon. Yeah, that'd be.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. So what you're, because I'm not sure I did. So what you're saying is, if the requirement really is about getting, say, original content, is this the main concern? Or if it's okay to use somebody else's analysis? Is what you're saying?
So what I'm saying is, right, there's, we can download data from all the data sources you showed us, plus, integrate GIS data, whatever you want to do. But, that's original, right? That's data that we're plugging into Excel, running the analysis upon. And then obviously there's, the 20 sources or whatever that we'll have that analyze the market that we're looking at. So what would you want, in our 3,000 word count, what would you want the breakdown between those two to be?
Okay. So I try to put more emphasis on things which are your work, your analysis, rather than on things which are more like a literature review. But again, so I'd say 1/3, 2/3 kind of thing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, if that makes sense, though. But again, I'm conscious of the fact that some of you might not be very strong at doing, quantitative analysis, and because I'm not teaching that in this module, I'm generally quite, a good review of existing stuff can go a long way. If you, and I'm saying this for some of you that I know you might not feel comfortable to, pull down numbers and do an extensive, detailed analysis of stuff. So I'm comfortable, with you not doing that if you feel that this is, skill for you to learn as we go now, because I'm not teaching that stuff. So some of you through your background will know how to do this, and some of you will not. So it's okay. I'm not going to disadvantage you for not knowing.
We should understand how many gigawatts of energy we have to install in our country.
Mm-hmm. So one way to think about it, because the real answer is quite complicated. So one way to think about it would be to look at what the country has already and what the country seems to need in terms of growth. Yeah, and what a country seems to need in terms of replacing assets. Yeah. So, for example, you will see that lots of countries really, face a gradual retirement of older power stations. Yeah, as you decarbonize the economy altogether. So, for example, as you electrify transport, or as you electrify heating or things like that, then you might need more electricity, so more installed gigawatts. Now, in terms of how many gigawatts are for, say, a European country, for example, looking to electrify completely transportation, electrify completely its heating systems, it's probably safe to say that they might need to double their capacity from what they have today, roughly speaking. Yeah, so you wouldn't be exaggerating if you were to do that, but I wouldn't worry so much about it, because in a way, your one type of renewable energy that you focus on will probably not be able to deliver that. Yeah, very, very few countries can have the potential to to decarbonize completely just with one type of renewable energy. It's very unlikely. So my answer is, look at what they have now, see if you can find in any future energy planning for that country and in any reports what they expect to need, and based on that, make an estimate of how much of that gap you might need to cover with the renewable energy you're focusing on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a guess in many ways, but it's what I would call an educated guess. Yeah, it's not a random guess. So yeah, that's that. Any other questions? Yes, no? Okay. So if you get anything more on the way, you let me know and we'll carry on with it. Now, I want us to go and take a look at what I call, major energy technologies. So what I'll do is I'll get the slides up for all of us to see. So that would be if I do share slides, come on. Or even it's my computer. Okay, can you see my slides now? Please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Good.
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad to hear. Okay, that's nice. You're all very nice people. You responded to my plea to say yes. So what I have here for you is we're going to be reviewing a number of energy technologies, energy production technologies. The important thing here for me is to show you a little bit of what is out there already, what technologies have got available, that we know they work at scale, very importantly, and they have been deployed already as part of our electricity supply systems, and we might be looking to deploy more of them in some way or another. So my disclaimer here, even though I know many of you are not many of you, or probably not any of you are engineers, is that I will be going through very basic operating principles for these engines. So I will not be going into a lot of detail. I will be treating a lot of stuff as black boxes and telling you only what goes in and what comes out. I'm very conscious that this is not an engineering program, so I will be keeping a lot of that away from you with a focus of understanding the business characteristics of these systems rather than the engineering characteristics of these systems. So if you see anything that doesn't make sense, do stop me. I'll be very, very happy to explain more. If you see something that you're wondering, but yeah, hang on a minute, how does that even work? Again, I'll be happy to explain a lot more. So, you know, by all means, I'm aware that what I'm going to be talking about is probably unknown stuff to most of you. Make sure you stop me and you don't stay with, you know, with questions. So let's, sure, yes, I've heard a voice. Let's go.
Have you started recording?
Oh, that's a good point, you see. I'm talking about steam turbines here. I don't even know how to press the record button. Here it is. Okay, thank you very much for the reminder. So, can you still see my slides, or I cancelled it?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, okay, and I think I have pressed the record button. So, we should now be okay to go. So, what we have here is a number of technologies which some of you, I'm sure, will comment and say that, yeah, but you know what, these are, you know, fossil fuel engines in reality. And this is a decarbonization module and, you know, talking about net zero and all of that. Why are you talking to us about old school polluting technologies? And really my main reason is that these technologies deliver and have delivered electricity for most of the planet for most of the past years. So that is what is now installed in pretty much every country around the world. So whenever we think of introducing, you know, wind turbines or solar panels or other technologies, we need to understand what is in that country, what kind of technologies are available in that country. Because your wind turbines will need to be combined with these older systems, which will probably be in operation for the next, you know, depending on the country and the power station, but at least for another 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 30 years even, yeah? So some of these power stations will stick around for a long time. So we need to understand how electricity at a country level can be provided, can be supplied securely, despite having, you know, many different types of electricity supply systems. So it's the integration part, which I'm very concerned about here. I don't want you to go away from this module thinking that you're going to be installing somewhere in a field, you know, a few wind farms and a few solar farms, and everything's going to work. It doesn't work. That is the truth. You know, you need to integrate everything with what is there already. And when you remove completely fossil fuels, we need to think again twice and 3 times about what exactly we need, what security measures we need to have in place to make sure that pricing will be correct, to make sure that electricity supply will be of high quality, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So that's why I'm going through that. The other reason, which is equally important, is that technologically speaking, if you understand a little bit of the principles of how some of the fossil fuel systems work, the technologies themselves are actually very similar with when you go to renewable energy technologies, or at least partly similar. So I want you to have a view of that, because that will probably make your lives a lot easier when you're going down the, you know, down the cycle of renewable energy technologies. So without carrying on too much on these explanations, let me get on with it so I can show you a little bit what I mean. So a lot of our conversations in this module are going to be about turbines. And as you can see here, I've put together a few types of turbines. So which ones of them do you think can run with renewable energy sources? What's your guess? See the turbines here first. Which one of them would you guess run with renewable energy sources?
Well, I guess wind turbines.
Sure.
Of course.
Hydro as well.
So wind and hydro, correct. That would be your straightforward stuff. You would expect that to run on renewables. Would you have any thoughts of the others?
steam turbine if you think about geothermal energy?
Very correct, yes. So exactly. Steam turbine, for example, could run on geothermal energy. Yeah. Yeah, so that's good enough. That's good enough. Yeah. So typically, I mean, most steam turbines in the world, they don't run on geothermal energy. They run on fossil fuels, or they even run on nuclear energy. And gas turbines typically will run on some kind of either natural gas directly or oil quite often. I mean, variations of oil. And combined cycle gas turbines typically will run on gas. Don't get confused when we say gas turbines. That doesn't indicate the fuel. Yeah, that's not the fuel we're talking about when we say gas. In the same way that steam turbine, the fuel is not steam. Yeah, steam is the medium that moves the turbine. So let me then tell you this very clear thing that all of these engines, steam turbine, gas turbine, combined cycle gas turbine, wind turbine, and hydro turbine, they're all turbines. They're the same, technologically, what you're looking at has exactly the same operating principles, which is why I'm bundling them together here and I'll talk to you about all of them at the same time almost. The other thing to consider is that internal combustion engines are a very different technology from turbines, but still one of the other technologies we have to produce electricity. Not only, but we can use it to produce electricity. And then last year I have photovoltaic PVs, yeah, so which are a different way in which we can produce electricity. There are obviously, other technologies that are out there that allow us to produce electricity. It's not that these are, the only ones, but these ones are the mainstream stuff that is out there and can be used for these purposes. So, and each one, it's a clause that normally listen and you hear that, there's something new out there that could produce electricity. Typically is a system that uses, one of the derivatives of what you see here. The only thing that I haven't put here, but to be honest, it's not really used very much, is fuel cells. But we'll hopefully have a little bit of time to talk about that one at some other part of this module. So let me get you directly in this very initial explanatory point. What is a turbine? It's a rotary engine that uses rotary because it rotates. Yeah, this is what rotary is. That uses energy of a fluid and turns it into useful work. Now, in physics, when you say fluid, it's not necessarily liquid. It can also be a gas. Yeah. So the air, the pressurized air, steam, all of these are fluids. So you take this a pressurized fluid and you make it rotate your engine over an axis, and then that axis is connected to an electricity generator. So the generator rotates and produces electricity. So that's, on very basic principles, that's the idea of how a turbine ends up producing electricity. Now, typically, that's what we call alternating current. Yeah. Now, because it rotates, it keeps changing directionality. So, but don't worry too much about this yet. So let me now take you a little bit through the variations of what these engines look like, and we'll have a bit of a more detailed conversation on each one of these turbine engines and what they're useful for and so on. So what I have here for you is a steam turbine. And this is what we'd call, a large scale, utility scale steam turbine. Now, there are a few things I want you to see here. It's that it's a very big engine. That's the first thing I want you to look at. The size, look how, the size of people around it. It's a very large engine. Then, if I were to move on the next slide here, have some more photos of such engines. Yeah, Now, what's happening in these engines? So, first thing is you need to produce high pressure steam. How will you produce steam? How will you produce steam at home?
Boiling water.
Boiling water, yeah, chances are that's your best way. So to do that, what do you need?
Well, heat, right? From gas or electricity.
You need heat, correct. And typically we produce heat by burning something. That's our, that is our main way of producing heat. There are other ways, but this is the most common way we have to produce heat. We burn stuff. So we burn stuff, we boil water, we pressurize that water. I mean, essentially, you would know that when you boil water in atmospheric temperature, as in temperature inside your room, in your kitchen or wherever, that steam, will never become pressurized because it just adapts the pressure in the environment it is in, and it evaporates and just goes away inside your kitchen or ventilated outside. So if you were in an environment where the steam could not escape, so if you were in an environment that you keep adding heat, but the steam has nowhere to go, what do you think would happen?
Pressure increases, maybe.
Correct. Have some of you seen a pressure cooker?
What, sorry, can you repeat the pressure?
Have some of you seen a pressure cooker?
Yes.
Yes?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
okay, yes.
Yeah, do you know what it is? Okay. Now I'm asking because I know they're not very popular. I think I'm the only one. I have one out of all my friends here. So a pressure cooker, technically, what it does, it's a casserole. It's a kitchen utensil. You put in stuff. You put in your water, food, whatever you want to put in there. But let's assume for now that you had only water in there, as if that was a cooking way. So you have only water, imagine, in a pressure cooker, and you keep giving it a lot of heat, and then the pressure, because it has that very nicely sealed, lid, when the pressure inside there, the water starts boiling and there is steam production. And what is actually going on is that the steam cannot vent outside at a low temperature, so you have a buildup of steam. Now let's think a little bit what's happening here. Normally, if you're boiling water with an open lid, what temperature does that water reach? What's the highest temperature you can do if you keep boiling water for an hour?
100 degrees.
Yeah, and whatever you do, no matter how strong your fire is going to be, the water will never go above 100 degrees. Because simply when it goes to 100 degrees, it evaporates and it goes away. Now, if that water couldn't go away, if that steam couldn't go away, what you have is a buildup of steam. And the interesting bit is that as the pressure inside the cooker grows, the water can boil at a higher temperature. Yeah? So essentially that means, the reason for that is, just to help you understand this a little bit, is that because there is pressure, so to build up more steam, the water has to be of higher energy content in order to evaporate, because there is resistance from the upper part of the gas part. Yeah. So where the steam is, there is higher pressure. So for water to move from the liquid phase to the air phase, it needs to overcome a higher pressure. It cannot travel up there otherwise. So for that reason, it needs to have higher energy content. To build up that higher energy content, it needs to have higher temperature. So for that reason and only, you can reach a higher temperature in your boiling water part. And that doesn't go, in a pressure cooker, you don't want this to go very high anyway. You don't want a bomb in your kitchen. And it's not even necessary because, you know, most food would just get destroyed completely in a very high temperature or in a very high pressure otherwise. So what it does is that normally, you know, it ends up with a temperature of around 115, 125, depending on your pressure cooker. That is enough to often reduce your cooking times, you know, by half or even less. So things that might need, you know, a lot of time to cook, I don't know, some hard meat or whatever, can easily come out in a third of the time in a high pressure cooker. So that is what that thing does there. Now, if you move a little bit of that thinking into a gas turbine, in gas turbines, we always try to reach a higher pressure. That means we have a contained area, an area where, you know, the steam cannot just vent out randomly, but is very highly kept in and highly pressurized, which results to a gradual rise of temperature and a gradual rise of heat in that area. The result is that your steam eventually has extremely high energy. So that high energy that the steam has is ready to move a large system, a large, you know, steam turbine. So, for example, if you see the steam turbines here, you know, it's an enormous, you know, thing. Imagine how heavy that is, and even with the best bearings, with the best engineering available, it's not something that you can just, you know, spin with your hand. It's very heavy. Its inertia is enormous. So you need a lot of energy to be able to make this turn. And you have all the design there, you know, the blades and all of that is in the right place. But in reality, you know, your steam needs to be of high quality, enormous quantity, and very high specific energy. So you need to burn a lot of fuel as well as everything else. So what fuels do you normally burn to run your steam turbines? Any thoughts on that? What would you burn to boil your water for the steam turbine?
Gas?
Gas is an option, sure. Other things?
Diesel.
What was that? Sorry? I didn't hear. Somebody said something else. What was it?
It was diesel, maybe.
Oh, I see. Okay. You see, diesel is a very refined fuel. I mean, you know, among fossil fuels, diesel is not necessarily the one you would throw in huge quantities in these engines. No.
Coal.
What was that?
Coal.
Coal. Yes, of course. We use a lot of coal for these ones. Lots of different types of coal. High quality, low quality, whatever. We use lots of coal for these ones. What else?
Well, now you have concentrated solar, where you have all the mirrors concentrating the sun on a tower, and then that heats steam, which spins the turbine.
Fred, is that you?
Yes.
Okay. There is something wrong with your microphone. I mean, I could tell what you said simply because I know what you were talking about. But your sound is, I don't know, there's something very muffled.
Can you hear me now?
I'll keep talking.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, you have concentrated solar, which is increasingly common, where using mirrors, an array of mirrors, it concentrates you know, the reflection of the sunlight onto one point, which then you know, heats the water and spins the turbine.
Okay. For those of you that didn't understand what Fred said, I've put it in the chat. It's concentrating solar, and I think you have to Google it because it looks really beautiful. It's some of the, you know, nicest power stations you can see out there. If you have a thing about liking power stations, that is, I do. So I'll explain to you a little bit more about concentrating solar rays a little bit later, but it's actually true that you could use that heat to produce steam and run a steam turbine. Other fuels you can use?
Waste.
Correct. You can burn waste. Lots of places do that. Lots of countries burn waste, and they take the heat to produce steam and run a steam turbine. Somebody else? Come on, there are a couple more. Couple more options. So far we've said coal, gas. What do we say? We said coal, gas, concentrated.
Oil.
What was that?
Oil.
Say again.
Oil.
Oil. You could use oil there. We don't do it much, but you could. You could. There's no reason why not.
Wood.
What was that?
Wood.
Wood.
Yeah.
Biomass. Biomass is another, yes. And there is a last one. Come on. We've said most of them. Somebody else also said before geothermal, yeah? When we're watching the turbines generally, somebody said, steam turbines can also run on geothermal, which is true. And there is one more.
Hydro.
No, hydro doesn't run on steam turbines. No.
Nuclear fission.
Yes, nuclear. The one I was talking about. Thank you. So that's mostly what you have there. So these are types of heat production systems, yeah, where you burn coal, you burn gas, you burn oil, you burn biomass, waste, correct, thank you, geothermal fluids, or nuclear fuels. You produce enormous amounts of heat. You use that heat to generate high pressure, high energy steam, and then that steam goes onto the blades of your steam turbine and turns a generator and produces electricity. So that's in very rough terms what this technology does. Let me show you a little bit this, very simple sort of, description of operating principles. And it's as simple as it gets here. So production of high pressure steam will spin your turbine, that will generate electricity because the electricity generator is on the same shaft, on the same axis with your turbine. Then you have to take the steam out of there, because you can imagine when that steam goes through the blades. Let me show you again. So the steam goes through the blades, turns the turbine, and then the steam goes behind the blades because it has just passed through. It has given a significant amount of its energy to those blades. And what happens next? Where does the steam go?
Part of it becomes water, and so it has to return to the initial point.
Yeah.
So it's water that needs to be heated another time. So we have this kind of circular loop.
Yeah. So that's the point here. Yeah. So normally steam turbines tend to be closed loop engines. Yeah. So you have the water, the steam really at the end of the turbine is not water yet. It still has a lot of pressure, a lot of heating, a lot of heat content in it, but it's much lower than what it was when it was entering the turbine, because a lot of its energy has now been converted to kinetic energy to move the turbine. Yeah. So at the end of the turbine, it's still steamy, hot steam. It's nothing else than that, but of lower energy content, nevertheless. So what you need to do at that point there is to cool it down even further and have it running through the same cycle again. Why do we do that? Why don't we just open the tap and take some new water and let the old water just fly out?
Well, I think first for not to waste, and then also because maybe the water is still like hot, and so when we have to eat it again, we don't have to eat it that much.
Okay, okay. Let me bring you another issue here. That is that we were cooling it a lot. So we put a lot of engineering into managing how to cool that water enough to make it, you know, normal temperature to run through pipes again. So we're actually giving ourselves a bit of a trouble to keep using the same water. There's not, in terms of energy savings, there's not much.
Maybe
a little bit, a tiny bit.
Sorry, maybe because you cannot emit the steam outside so much. Maybe there are some because there are problems
restrictions in steam emissions.
Yeah, for emissions.
Yeah, that's not even very much.
I think it's a matter of pressure.
Say again, sorry?
Pressure, to not lose pressure.
You lose all of these things. You take it down to very low pressure. Some places you take it down to almost atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric, like 2 or 3 bars instead of 100 that was inside. There's a little hint here. Okay, so it has to do everything with the quality of that water. So that's not normal water, yeah? That is purified water and purified steam. And the idea is that you need a grade of steam that when it reaches enormously high pressure and hits the blades of a turbine, will not damage those blades. Now, how do you do that, and what is essentially damaging turbine blades? This can be partly when your water is it has little particles of impurities. So these can be typically salts and solids that normal water has, yeah? So when any of these normal salts and solids are in some concentration in your turbine water, the danger is that at very high pressure, they can start causing little, what we call caving in your turbine blades. So the blades, and you saw the blades before, yeah? Let me show them to you again, it's quite crazy. You see these blades, they're not any kind of, they're not aluminium foil that you have to cover your food at home. They're really thick metal, steel blades. However, with extremely high pressure of steam, if there are any tiny solids inside the steam, it is very likely that these blades start having small holes, punctures, that these little particles of salts in the water can cause. So that means that your water has to be extremely purified. It cannot have any particles in there, because otherwise you're going to destroy your turbine. As a result, that water is not the water you're finding at your tap. It's water that has been cleaned for that purpose and has been cleaned and cleaned again, and you keep cleaning it essentially throughout the process that you use it. As a result, you cannot be letting it go and building new water every time. The issue of wastewater was another one your colleague has mentioned earlier on. That's not that is a good reason as well. So it's water waste, but also high expenditure to bring that water to the condition you need it to be to operate a steam turbine. So these two reasons, yeah, are really the main thing that's going on there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hopefully, yes. So you do then end up, let me just scroll back here. So let's stay at this part. Now, if you know that the water has to stay in the system, let's think a little bit what we do next. So we try, when that water comes out of your turbine, like I said before, it's not water, it's still high pressure steam, just a little bit lower pressure than it was when it went in. but it still has significant energy content. So you need to cool it down. What do you do to cool it down? There are a couple of technologies. Typically, they're all different types of heat exchangers. So normally we will have a cooling tower. Let me show you. Maybe you've seen something like this before. Have you seen something like this before somewhere? Is this a familiar sight?
Yeah.
No? Nobody has seen this before?
Yes, yes.
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 Ah, okay. What are they? No idea? Are they chimneys?
I
What do they
think
emit up there?
I think inside is where there is the cooling system, and but I'm not sure. I've seen many of them in Belgium. I thought they were related to nuclear plants,
Correct.
but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it is for the heat cooling down of the water.
Yes. So what you do with these are cooling towers. They're not chimneys. If you can see here, I mean, this is not particularly a good picture, but if you can see here, you have these super large towers. These are the cooling towers. They're very big in terms of weight. They're enormous. I don't know if you can see down here. Do you see this tower I'm showing you here? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a much smaller one. This is a chimney. This is the chimney. The other ones, the super large ones, are the cooling towers. Now, what cooling towers do is essentially they allow a system, they allow a lot of airspace and a lot of air circulation. So at the bottom of these towers, there are gaps that allow air to go inside the tower. So the tower doesn't sit on a solid base on the ground. It rather has, imagine like the solid base has a lot of windows that allow a lot of air to go inside the tower from underneath. Yeah, that's where it meets your very hot water. That hot water then transfers a lot of the heat it has onto your cooling, onto your fresh air that comes in, and then that air travels all the way, as it gets hotter, travels all the way up and gets outside in the atmosphere. Yeah, taking with it often a little bit of water content, which is when you see, you know, these towers puffing a bit of steam out. So that's what these do. They're cooling towers, just use atmospheric air, huge quantities of atmospheric air to essentially drive a lot of the heat out of the power station, out of the power station's water and steam, and take it outside of there. Yeah. How much energy of the energy you produced initially when you were burning coal, for example, ends up back into the atmosphere as heat, as waste heat?
Maybe 50%.
Even more, yeah, 60% easily, yeah. So more than half of the heat you produced with your initial burning of, you know, whatever fuel you burned, more than half of that goes back into the atmosphere as excess heat. And cooling towers is one of the ways we have to do that. Now, there are other cooling systems that we have. Your colleague mentioned before that he has seen lots of these towers in Belgium. They are present in pretty much every country that runs large types of fossil fuel power stations, whether that is coal or I mean gas. It's a little bit more rare. You wouldn't see them that much with gas, but with coal you definitely do. With nuclear you absolutely do. And you know, the larger the power station, the more likely it is they will need to have something like that. Now, quite often in some of these power stations, we use other ways to cool our water. And you know, if we have access to a fresh water source, when I say fresh, could also be seawater. but it's a cool water source, in other words, then we might not need these ones. Okay? So if our power station is built next to the seaside, for example, a much easier way to cool it down would be to allow seawater in heat exchangers. Let me see if I have a picture of a heat exchange. Do I have somewhere here? Maybe. Yes, that's one. So that's kind of a heat exchanger system. So really, you run one liquid through the pipes and a different liquid around the pipes. So this is a heat exchanger, but it's missing its main cover. Yeah. So all of what you see is normally covered inside a shell, and you can see there are gaps between all of these pipes. So you would normally be letting one liquid to flow between the pipes and a different liquid to flow inside the pipes. And these two liquids, because of all of this enormous surface that there is, they end up exchanging a lot of heat between them. So for example, if you were to run your very highly pressurized steam that comes out of your turbine in between these pipes here, and in the pipes you had some cold water from the sea, for example, then the cold water from the sea would absorb a lot of the heat from your steam, eventually making it water, yeah? Cooling it down as much as to make it water. So it would absorb a lot of the temperature. So if you have, seawater going in there at 10 degrees, you will be arranging your system to be such that, it comes out at 20 degrees. And just have a high flow system, and then you just release it back into the sea. You don't want it to be of a very high temperature when it goes back into the sea, because you don't want to have topical areas in the sea which end up being coral reefs with super high temperature. Right? It's not good for the rest of the ecosystem. So same for lakes, same for rivers, and so on. Yeah. So that would be your normal ways of taking some heat out of your power station and going back to nature, if you cannot have a cooling tower. So that's your typical systems there for cooling a system. So cooling a power station is not a small job. That's what I'm trying to tell you overall. It's a significant part of the operation, and it's one that is, in my opinion, signifying how wasteful that process really is. Yeah, that, if we just keep dumping out in the nature more than half of the energy we produced by burning fossil fuels. So steam turbine, final card of information here for you. Possible fuels, we talked about coal, gas, oil, nuclear, geothermal fluids. I would add here biomass. It's a very typical one for steam turbines, and waste. These are all falling in the broad category of solid fuels, yeah? All of the ones we just talked about. Now, efficiency, sometimes 48%, but really this is extreme. Most steam turbines don't do 48%. That's very rare. Most operating systems are below 40%. Now, startup times, you're looking at relatively slow startup. Steam production takes time. It cannot be adjusted, very rapidly. So if energy demand changes, then you're probably going to need something else to, respond to that change. It's not going to be your steam turbine. Use typically what we call here a base load or scheduled load, I would like to say. So loads that you know will be there and you can plan in advance. So if you know that there will be demand for energy at that certain time, you can start preparing a couple of hours from a cold run and make the system run when you need to. Typical capacities, it's very variable. I'm writing here 300 megawatts to 500 megawatts, something like that. They rarely are a lot bigger than that per turbine. A coal-fired power station can be a lot bigger than that, or a nuclear power station can be a lot bigger than that, but they would normally use more than one turbine. Yeah, so they would have multiple turbines lined up, and that is what would produce all the energy that you need. Installation times are very variable here. Yeah, so if you're looking for nuclear, 10 years might even be, not necessarily easy. If you're looking for gas, you could be having this up and running in 3 years if you run. So it depends again on how, you know, the country you're talking about, the certification systems, the all the legal stuff that you need to cover, how new the design is, and so on. It's not a straightforward question. It's not a straightforward answer, rather, on how long it will take. But it's several years for installation time. So before I move you on to other types of technologies, do you have any questions on steam turbines so far? No? Okay.
Can I ask you something, please?
Please.
So, as I understood, the main thing in those turbines is a steam, but for example, if we use coal as a fuel, so we burn fuel and we burn coal, and then its energy that it gives us, it makes a steam, or how can we get the steam from the coal?
Okay, so that's a good point. Okay, so and one I didn't talk very much about. So that's where you have your boiler. So what the boiler is essentially boilers are different depending on the fuel you use. Yeah. So, but typically a boiler is a combustion chamber. So it's a large room. Room, depending on the size. If you're talking about a power station boiler, that would be a large room where inside which you throw pulverized coal, so coal that has been turned into powder, and with oxygen, you start the process of burning that coal. Now, inside that system, you have pipes that are basically pipes that are inside the chamber, and their role is to take as much heat as they can from the burning of coal and transfer it to water, and that is the water that later becomes steam. Does that make sense? Or did I make it very silly?
Now it's more clear.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
So, do you have a boiler at home? Do you have a gas boiler at home for heating?
I guess so. Yes.
Yes, hopefully. So your gas boiler at home is a small boiler in reality. It's exactly the same. It has a tiny chamber, probably about that big. If it's a super efficient one, it's a bit larger than a can of Coke. And it has inside there a very dense system of pipes, tiny pipes. They're very small. They're thinner than my fingers. And they go inside like this, and then like a little snake, and water, the water that ends up in your, radiators goes through those pipes and gets hot, and that's the area that gets as much heating as possible from the flame, the gas flame. So it's that little chamber where everything happens. It's just that with power stations, especially coal-fired power stations, which are very large. Even worse when they use lignite, for example, when they use low-density coal. Because lignite is, you burn a lot of lignite because it's low-quality fuel. Yeah, so you need a lot of the fuel to produce some significant amount of electricity. So, particularly in these ones, the combustion chambers are ginormous. You're talking about, 5-6 meters tall and 5-6 meters wide. They're like very large rooms. So it's a scale difference, really, but the principles are exactly the same.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was wondering what is the water footprint of the system?
You mean of the whole power station?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're looking for a standard, steam turbine power station, and again that kind of differs a little bit depending on how much of the operation is vertically integrated. So, for example, if you're having, say, a coal-fired power station, often that will be next to a coal mine. So you have coal being, traveling from the coal mine directly to the power station with some sort of a conveyor belt or from, a small local train system or something like that. And then as soon as it arrives in your power station, you will be having other processes in terms of washing that coal, pulverizing it, drying it. So these are, let's say, parts of the industrial process of processing coal. If you count all of these things inside your power station, and then of course you will have your cooling system and your water processing system and your turbines and your electricity generator and the transformers that will take the electricity outside of the power station and so on. If you have all of these parts inside, you're talking of 5-6 kilometers, multiply 5-6 kilometers, something like that. Also depends on how expensive is land in that area. If land is very expensive where that is, then they will try to condense them and use them a little bit less. But typically it's better engineering to not have them as close to each other. You want to have some healthy distancing that allows you to do expansion works and so on.
Yeah, but I was thinking where they take water from normally.
You mean water for cooling purposes?
No, also for boiling. Because if you need a lot of water for boiling and...
That you take it once. And then then usually you will be adding a tiny amount of water as you use it, because some of it is getting lost in the process. You have losses in the process. But you don't expect to be, bringing in water, because it's a closed loop system. So the water that you put in stays in reality. And then you keep circulating. You make it steam, you run the turbine, you cool it down, and you bring it back and make it steam again, and you make the same circle. So there might be a little bit losses, but it's not significant. It's mostly the cooling water that you will need a lot of, for which you normally have, either a lake, a river, or the sea.
Okay, clear, thank you.
Yeah, okay. And that, I should add, is one of the main weaknesses of these types of power stations. So if you rely on, say, a nearby lake or river or the sea, then there are certain environmental regulations with regards to how much and what temperature of hot water you're allowed to release inside these environments, inside these natural environments. Because otherwise if it's a lake, you're gonna boil the lake. You're gonna end up with a lake that has, a very high temperature. What's the water in a lake normally? Depends on where the lake is, one would say, and what the season is. But if you're looking at a lake, I don't know, say in Sweden, what kind of temperature would you expect to have?
10 degrees.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Maybe significantly lower in winter, maybe a little bit higher in summer, but maybe between 5 and 15 roughly, something like that. And that's the natural temperature for that lake. That's the temperature with where the natural ecosystem in that lake is used to function, the fish to grow and the plants to grow and so on. So if you have a power station, a nuclear power station next to that, and you keep pushing hot water in there, water that absorbed some of the waste heat from the nuclear power station. So it's very easy, if it's a large power station and a not so large lake, you can easily end up pushing water in there that could be, 25, 30 degrees, which might raise the temperature of the lake. Now that has two problems. One is that the ecosystem will be damaged, because the ecosystem is not used to having water of 30 degrees there. So that's one thing, that you can totally destroy the ecosystem. But you're also running the danger of having very high evaporations. So you might end up evaporating a lot of that water. And you do see it in lakes that are next to nuclear power stations. If you go in there in a relatively cold day, and the nuclear power station is working at full, you will see small evaporation above the lake. If it's only small, like I said, it's not a big thing, but you cannot keep rising the temperature because you will increase evaporation, you will lose water, you will end up diminishing the ecosystem there and its capacity to keep cooling you. So that is one of the main security issues when it comes to nuclear energy. Significant, I would say, even more nuclear than others, because nuclear needs cooling all the time. You cannot stop the cooling system. Like, you know, with coal and with gas or with, I don't know, with pretty much any other steam turbine technology, fuel, sorry, you can stop the process, you can stop running the power station quite easily. And in that way, you can reduce the need for cooling or even make it zero. Yeah, you don't need to cool a coal-fired power station forever. But when it comes to nuclear, even when you stop operating the nuclear power station, and I mean stop completely, you know, imagine you stopped using the power station, you retire the power station. For decades after that, you need to keep running the cooling system. That doesn't stop. Because the reaction is not something that stops overnight. You know, you cannot just decide to stop the nuclear reactions. There is still heat production that needs to be cooled down. It's lower than it was when you were working at full capacity, but there's still stuff happening there. So it's one of the main security concerns when it comes to nuclear issues. Your capacity to keep the cooling systems running as they should. Equally, it's a concern in places that get, you know, very hot summers, for example. In France, we have pretty much every year lately, certain nuclear power stations have to stop operating, have to reduce their output because they cannot get enough cooling. Because the water in the nearby lake is already warm. So as a result, when they put in water into the power station to absorb some of the heat, that's already problematic because that water doesn't come in cold enough to have capacity to grow, to absorb a lot of heat. So then when you pump it out, it can only absorb, say, a 5 degrees differential, not a 10 degrees differential. The numbers are not exactly accurate, yeah, but you can absorb a smaller temperature differential. So its heat absorption capacity is greatly reduced. So there are lots of nuclear power stations that, because of that, they cannot operate for certain periods of the summer. They have to slow down their output. Yeah, so that's all I had to tell you for steam turbines. Do you have any questions? Anything you need me to clarify beyond that? No? Oh, good. So should I then take us to the next part of this, which is, now that you've heard everything about steam turbines, let's go to gas turbines. So more turbines for you then. And what we have here is a couple of differences. Yes, so this is again a turbine, slightly different design. I'll explain a bit more of what I mean with that. It could look a bit like this. So if you see, the design is slightly different than the other turbines, but maybe that's not so necessary to explain in detail here. Have you seen any gas turbine? Has anybody seen a gas turbine?
No, I think not.
Has anybody seen a steam turbine? No? Okay. So I can tell you that almost with 100% certainty, you have all seen from very close a gas turbine. Do you have any guess where you might have seen one?
Airplanes?
Correct. Yes. So gas turbines are airplane engines. Yeah. So, I mean, not only, but that's one of the most, let's say, prolific uses that you have for gas turbines. So you have them for electricity generation, but that's not the only use that you have them for. Yeah. So this is an example of a gas turbine that is essentially an airplane engine. And you see it in this format here, which makes it so familiar that now you've seen it before, you know what it is, yeah? So what we have with these ones, let's take a quick look at what we expect here, what is happening in that with its operating principles. So first thing that you have is the air pressurization. So you have an air inlet, and you suck in a lot of air. Now that is exactly what you see here. Yeah, when you see an airplane engine under the wings, normally, what you see is that that part here, that front part is the one that you probably pay most attention to. And what that front part has is that air inlet. It's a fan that absorbs, that sucks in a lot of air. That's what it does, and that's why it's very dangerous to be close to these engines. When they do engine tests, or when they start running at full capacity, you don't want anything to be in front of them, because chances are it will be sucked in. Yeah? It's very dangerous, both for the engine, and if that something is a person, that's probably the end. So first thing is, you take air in, high quantities of air in, and it goes through a pressurizing process. And that pressurized air is driven in a combustion chamber with fuel, and the combustion begins there. That's where the combustion happens. And the combustion, of course, increases pressure even further, yeah, because it's an explosive combustion that grows the volume of gases being produced, and as a result produces extremely high pressure and high energy fumes. Now these fumes are going to the next stage of the chamber, and what is there is basically the turbine itself. So the turbine then is turned, and when the turbine turns, you probably have that hooked on a generator, and you produce electricity. And then, of course, you need some system to take the exhaust fumes that have lower pressure and lower heat, and take them outside of the whole engine and lead them somewhere, wherever you're going to lead them, depending on the type of engine you have. So that's very, in brief what that does. Yeah, so what is the main difference then from a steam turbine?
That you don't use water.
Yeah, so in this one you will not use water and steam as your means of running the turbine. The turbine is running with the fumes. So the fumes are what turns the turbine. Whereas in the steam turbine, it was purified water, and the fumes were driven separately outside through a chimney and going outside in the environment. So the fumes were not used for anything in reality in the steam turbine. But here, it's the fumes that turn your turbine. So that's, I would say, one major difference, really. Let's see a little bit more what that can mean in reality. Yeah? So possible fuels here, I'm saying gas and oil, and it depends a lot. There are different types of gases that you can run. There are many different types of oil you can run them with. For airplanes, that's airplane fuel, what's known as kerosene, and so on. Now, efficiency, so the amount of energy you manage to convert, from the heat to convert it to electricity, that will be about, 30%, 35%. If things work, incredibly well, it might even reach 40%. So it's similar in many ways. It's similar to the other turbines we saw, to the steam turbines. Similar type of efficiency, about 1/3 to 2/3. So 1/3 of useful work and about 2/3 of waste heat. Now, startup time here is very different. Yeah, we were talking previously when it was about steam turbines that you need a bit of time to produce the steam, to have a very large engine start working, and so on. So it wasn't a system that looked likely to respond to fast changes of demand, of electricity demand. Now with gas turbines, it's different because startup time can be rapid. Why is it rapid? Because there is no means, there is no other medium that you try to transfer temperature to do anything. Yeah, you just have the fumes. You throw more fuel, more air in there, you produce more energy. It can be very fast. It can respond in a number of minutes. In fact, it responds in even less than 1 minute. It starts ramping up electricity generation in less than 1 minute. And the climb is very rapid. So in a few minutes, you can have, you can go from middle load to full load in just a few minutes. It can be really good in that sense. And that's why traditionally we have used gas turbines in electricity generation to meet all the uncertain parts of the demand. Yeah, so we have used them quite a lot for what we call demand following. Yeah, so you follow the demand, you forecast the demand every minute, and then with gas turbines, you end up following the demand to make sure the demand is being met all the times. So that has been, let's say, the most typical use of these gas turbines in electricity generation. You will hear the term peaker power plants. So the power plants that are designed to follow the electricity peak demand. That's what that means. That's why I say here they're good for peak load. Now, typical capacity, there are literally all sorts of sizes. I'm saying here that in electricity generation, you often have them at about 150 megawatts to maybe 300, rarely ever much bigger than that per single turbine. Now, installation time is very different again than the conventional power stations. And that is because, I say here, 6 months to 2 years, but really, there do exist gas turbines that you can order them and they come in containers. So literally a smaller, it wouldn't be a 300 megawatts wind turbine, sure, it would be a much smaller one. But you could order a gas turbine and it literally comes to you in a container. You put fuel from one end and you get your cables from the other end producing electricity. You just need some cooling system there to make sure it's not gonna burn itself. So the fact that it can come containerized gives it an enormous versatility, an enormous flexibility that you can deploy it in very short time. What does that mean in reality? I mean, what's your impression? Do we use these engines a lot today? Are they a good idea? What do you think?
I mean, until battery technology gets better, I think that they're a good solution in managing, especially if you have an area with a lot of renewables, they can have, very high peaks in order to sort of address those, the troughs in production when it's not sunny out, at night. I think that they provide a good solution, but hopefully, in the medium term, we can replace them with battery technology that'll help to address periods of lower generation.
That's a good point. Okay, so you see the increase of renewables gradually over the years has meant that often, when you try to follow wind energy production, for example, because wind energy production can be pretty variable. It doesn't come out, as exactly stable, simply because the wind speed is not stable. So the production is not as stable as you would like it to be. The result is that you need something, a technology that allows wind energy production to be a little bit more stable, so less, more predictable in a way, and allows, the overall electricity system of a country to be a bit more reliable. So typically, we have used a lot of gas turbines to do that. So the more wind you put in the system, the more gas turbines you need in order to make sure that when the wind, slows down even a little bit, then gas turbines can flexibly pick that up and make sure that there is, good quality power in that network. Now, it's not the only way, yeah, clearly. And as your colleague has just said, gradually we're moving towards a situation where large-scale batteries can play that role. Because you don't need gas turbines to run, like 24/7. Clearly, you need them to run for a few hours per day, and typically that's not continuous few hours per day. It can be a few minutes here, a few minutes there, whenever there is a drop in supply from renewables, which gives them enough time to recharge. If it was, for example, batteries, you can be doing that role, injecting some power, making sure that the system stays stable, then a few minutes later absorbing some power when that's needed, and so on and so forth. So the battery remains charged and remains capable of stabilizing the system. And of course, when you're talking about nighttime or anything, then it has all the time it needs to recharge and do anything else. But yes, so there are alternatives. Gradually, there are alternatives which wouldn't require, to burn gas or anything else. Now, another area where we use these turbines is in some kind of emergency operations, for example. So I remember a few years back, I used to work on a project on Guernsey Island. That's one of the Channel Islands between France and the UK. And there, most of their electricity was coming from France through a cable. So there's a cable that connects them to mainland France, and that's how pretty much all of their electricity was coming from. Now, what happened was a trawler, usually a large fishing boat, went past, and as the trawlers, they just scrape essentially the seabed with their nets. They also scraped the cable, and when that happened, the cable got completely destabilized, and basically they had to shut down completely the power supply from France. And so you can imagine it's a whole island. That's not a small island, by the way. It's a significant one with several dozens of people living on it, dozen of thousands of people living on it. And suddenly they end up without electricity. Not least, it's an island that hosts very significant banking operations. So going offline is not exactly a good idea for many ways, for many reasons. So the response to that was, you don't have enough time to restore a cable. You need, you cannot do that in a day. No cables are being fixed in a day. Cables, depending on the level of damage, normally you're looking for anything between a couple of weeks to a year, something like that, yeah? So it can be a very lengthy time to stay without electricity. You cannot build very easily a new power station as well. It's not straightforward. You need supply of fuels, you need other things there. It's not something you can do overnight. So at the time, what they did, they ordered a mobile power station. It was a large container ship that came in. It docked at the main port of the island, and it had its own oil supply. So the ship had its own oil containers that were being refueled, and an enormous gas turbine. So they plugged the gas turbine on the island's network with a transformer, and they re-electrified the island. In about a couple of weeks' time, it was done, while the cable was being fixed, because the cable took a long time to fix. So systems like that are available to provide, emergency electricity supply when that's needed. It's not. I'm not saying it's straightforward or that it's environmentally a good idea. Environmentally, it's a disaster because you just burn all of this oil probably in a less efficient method and all of that. So it's not environmentally speaking, it's not a good idea, but it is something that can ramp up your supply when it's necessary and avert completely a catastrophe in a small island. So that's what gas turbines can do. Plus, of course, or the airplane engines that you saw already. We use them sometimes as normal static engines as well on various islands. So there are islands that run on a gas turbine. Not a floating on a ship, but as a normal power station. And sometimes they're also used as large ship engines. Yeah, you can see them there as well. So that's that. with gas turbines. Any questions? Nothing serious on the gas turbines. Okay. Do you guys want a break? Let's take a break now. Maybe it's now a good time. Let's take a break and then let's come back to talk about other turbines, shall we?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I'll see you in, what time is it now? Let's say 1 o'clock. Sorry, 1 o'clock my time. Wait, 2 o'clock your time.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'll see you soon then, okay. Hello. Sorry for the delay in starting up. I even managed to come back, switch on my camera and my microphone, then leave the meeting. I don't know why. So let me check with all of you. Have you got access now to the last two recordings? Because I've uploaded both of them.
Yeah, the problem is that we can access them just using your link. So where are you trying to upload them?
So what I've done is...
can you share your screen so that...
maybe, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I can do that. So, if I do this, where's the screen? So what I see is a screen like this. Can you see that screen?
Yeah.
So, and if you see here, it has, chat, files, meeting notes, whatever. So our chat is this one, which is what I was writing a minute ago when I said, sorry, I'll be a bit late. And then the files are here. So the two last files I've uploaded were the videos of last week. Can you, do you have access to what I'm showing you, or?
Yes, I have.
Yeah? Okay. I'd like to hope that you do, because that will be, our normal place where we, we should use for file sharing and anything else you want me to be uploading. And do the links work? If you click on them, can you download them? Can you watch them? Can you do whatever you need to do with them? Hopefully, yes. But if anybody has problems, I'm not sure what, if we have any alternatives where I can be uploading stuff.
There is an alternative, because this is the files section of our currently lesson. Okay?
Yes.
But if you go on Teams on the left, you see that on my
Yep.
And there is also a file section.
Another files here.
It's the general one. Everyone has access to it.
So this is not the one that has recordings.
Yeah.
So here, can I see? So is this? So these are the first two recordings that we had. Yeah.
This is the place where everyone is supposed to go when looking for classes and material.
Okay. So I'm wondering. So maybe the easiest I can do, and I can do it maybe literally right now. I can just take this and this and bring them in here. They will take a bit of time, so you have them here as well. Okay. Hopefully that will help now. So let us then go back to our class. So is somebody? Okay. So Daniel, I think with what we just did, probably you will have access to all of them, but it will take a few minutes until they're uploaded, because we upload them in two different places. Okay, so shall we continue with our slides? So let me go to share my slides. Here we are. So we talked quite a lot about steam turbines and about gas turbines, and let me now get you to, as if that wasn't enough, to take you to what is called combined cycle gas turbine. Don't worry too much about the picture. Really what you have in a combined cycle gas turbine, you have two turbines, one steam turbine and one gas turbine combined. So you have both of the two. And the idea typically is that you will first run your gas turbine. So you will be having the fumes. I can hear a bit of noise. So you will have your the fumes from your gas turbine running the gas turbine first, and then as they go outside of the gas turbine and they're being released into the atmosphere. You don't really let that happen as you would normally do with a gas turbine, but you take them back into your system and you run them through a heat exchanger. And through that heat exchanger, you produce steam. So you produce steam and then subsequently you run a steam turbine. Of course, in continuous operation, they will both run at the same time. As these turbines now, they can be combined to, sometimes they're combined to run on the same shaft. So on the same shaft, you have a gas turbine and a steam turbine, both moving the same shaft, so moving the same generator, really. Or you can have them in different shafts, moving different generators. Depends on the power station setup and how it was designed. Okay, these are the combined cycle gas turbines. Why do we do that? I mean, what's the reason? Why would you combine these two?
Maybe in order to reduce the emissions and save gas and steam.
What, I mean, in what way would you save? Would you reduce emissions? It's an
Well,
interesting point. Tell us more.
We don't let the emissions of the gas turbine that runs first go in the atmosphere. We keep it inside, and we make it run into another system, which is the steam turbine, and we produce electricity again, starting from the waste produced in the first turbine.
Okay.
Is that right?
Okay, so what you said is very, very correct. There's only one caveat for me here to add, that eventually the emissions will go out, yeah? So we do emit them eventually. But before we let them go outside in the atmosphere, we use them twice. Yeah, we use them once to run the gas turbine and once to run the steam turbine. In reality, that means that we increase a lot the efficiency of the power station. So for the same amount of fuel burned, we produce a lot more electricity. That's the benefit there. As a result, of course, that means lower emissions per unit of energy that we have produced. So that was a very good point. That is why we have these combined cycle gas turbines. They're used quite a lot in countries that have natural gas as their main electricity fuel. So in countries that have done significant investment in natural gas electricity generation, you would have a lot of CCGT power stations, that the combined cycle gas turbines. You normally see them written as CCGT systems. So that's that. The cycle I'm having here, the basic principles, it's exactly the same, as you've seen with the other two cycles. It's just you combine, instead of emitting the fumes, you just let them run through your steam cycle. So these are the heat exchangers I showed you before. Let me see other things here. So that's again a heat exchanger. Yeah. So in terms of fuels, you normally run these with gas or with oil, even geothermal fluid, depending on the design. Oil is not that regular, really. To be honest, it's mostly gas. It's mostly natural gas that you see them running with. Now, in terms of efficiency, lots of these reach very close to 60%. And because they're a relatively new design, a relatively, let's say advanced design, most of the systems that are out in the market are up and running, they operate close to the optimum, so close to 60%. Unlike what you saw before, for example, with some steam turbines, which the best of them can be 48%, but there are many of them who are 30%. So there's a huge gap there. Here you see much less of that gap because it's a newer technology overall. It's not that new, it's not last year's technology. It's been around for 20 years, but 20 years is different than, say 50 years or 60 years. So that's the efficiency side of it a lot better than with any of the other 2 cycles alone. Startup time depends now. So if you have independent cycles, so if the system doesn't run on the same shaft and there are independent shafts and independent generators, then you can have a fast gas cycle and a slow steam cycle. And you can combine them in whatever way makes sense. In most of the cases, they're single shafts. So really, it is not that fast to catch up. It's still base load systems. So it depends on, like I'm saying here the same. Your fast systems need like 30 minutes at least to reach nominal output. So typical capacity, they're not small. These power stations typically tend to be around 500 megawatts, exactly because they have the 2 turbines. They're usually of significant power output. Installation time 4 to 6 years, but again, depends on regulatory stuff, etc., and what kind of delays might occur there. But 4 to 6 years is quite standard in these ones. If I were to ask you any questions on these ones, anything that sounds confusing? No? Okay. So then let's leave these turbines behind us and go to some other turbines now. So you won't have enough turbines today. Let's see. So here I have for you hydro turbines. Now, hydro turbines are a whole other sort of system, but the principle is exactly the same. So you call it by the medium that goes inside the turbine and turns the blades and turns the turbine and the shaft and the generator. Here we call it hydro turbine because it's water. Water allows for this to happen. They're typically large-scale systems, and we install them either close to a dam, that's the kind of normal large-scale hydropower station, or we install them just at the flow of a river, depending on the kind of design you have there. So let's see a few more details here, so we can understand a little bit more of what's happening with them. These are just other designs. They look like a propeller in many ways. Let me take you further down. So typically for a hydro turbine to operate, you will have water being gathered at a very high reservoir, and you will create essentially an artificial lake. That is where all of your water is going to be. And then you will have a very long water pipe that goes significantly lower than the lake, and that creates the hydrostatic pressure on the turbine. And then there will be the turbine at a lower level, and there will be electricity generation there. And of course, the water, after it passes through the turbine, it will flow down and it will just go away. Yeah, so that is it could continue to a normal river, or I don't know, we'll just go to the sea, or whatever is the particular geography. I would imagine that you've all been to a dam somewhere, maybe? You must have. Is there anybody that has not been to a hydropower dam? No? You've all been to one. Okay. So the standard place that you see, so you see a large dam, right? I mean, that's a typical design. You see a large dam blocking the entrance to a river and creating an artificial lake behind that. So that's the upstream part where the artificial lake is being created. And then at the downstream part, there is various things there, technically speaking. One, there will be a release for the water to keep flowing. Another might be the hydrostatic pipe that allows for the pressure to build up on the turbine or the turbines, if there are many turbines. If there's a high flow system, there might be turbines at a lower level, they're at a higher level, and maybe a sequence of turbines going down, and so on. Sometimes there's a lower reservoir as well. Sometimes there might be a reservoir of water which is at a lower level, so it collects water, which then can pump up if that is required, because we have excess electricity from a different power station. But yeah, broadly speaking, that's the typical use you have there. Let's see a little bit more of what we have in these systems. Yeah, so you can see here this kind of design. Yeah, it depends. I mean, the details and the sizing and all of that depend quite a lot. But at scale, really, what you would normally have is the reservoir blocked by a significant construction, which is the dam, and then you have your powerhouse, the generator, and the pressurized water coming here, running the turbine, running the generator, producing electricity. Electricity goes away through cables, and the water flows continuously downstream through a river. Now, there are certain characteristics that make hydro turbines really, really interesting. Now, one of them is their efficiency. Depending on the design, I'm saying here more than 90%. Sometimes maybe it can be even a little bit below 90%, but let's say 90% for our sake now. So that means that out of the potential energy that water at a high elevation has, you convert roughly 90% of that to electricity. It's really enormous. I mean, you couldn't expect a lot better from any device, any system. Cut-off time is rapid because typically the water is there and waiting. Yeah? Assuming you have water in your reservoir, startup time can be really rapid. It's a matter of minutes until you hit peak demand, nominal capacity, and being able to supply as much as the power station can supply. For that reason, we tend to use these power stations easily for peak load, yes, so they can easily follow rapidly changing demand in any country system, or they can easily smoothen the output of a wind farm as well, which is again another important feature. Now, in some countries and in some seasons, we have enormous amounts of hydropower energy available. That is when we have a lot of water supply. Okay, when that happens, we use them for everything, for base load, for peak load, for whatever, whatever. It's a non-stop resource in that sense, and in fact, we need to use it because we don't want water to accumulate behind the dams. Yeah, it's not a safe thing. You want the water to keep flowing and keep going down. You don't want a lot of accumulation there. Very high dam level can cause the dam to topple, and it's all sorts of very dangerous things can happen there. Now, typical capacity here, I'm writing 100 megawatts, but frankly, that's really, in reality, is very, very variable. You have very small turbines. They do exist, and you have crazy big ones that are used, in high pressure systems that can produce a lot of energy, even, much more than 100. You can easily see 300 megawatts turbines. Installation times, it really is a question of how complicated the dam is and how long time do you need to fill the dam and all of that. So I'm saying here 4 to 10 years, and really depends on a number of parameters, including the variability of the weather. Yeah? So including how long you will need to wait for the reservoir to fill with enough water to start operating it. Because, there are periods where the water flows really strongly. There are droughts that might, delay you by a couple of years or things like that. So it can be difficult to predict exactly how long you will need. It's a very long-term project, in one that if it's designed properly and if, knock wood, everything goes well, it's a type of energy that you can have for a very long time. So all of the other power stations we've talked about so far, say for example, a gas turbine power station or a steam turbine power station, how long do you think we keep them for? How long do you think is their lifespan? As a guess, I mean, I know you don't have expertise in that, but what would be your guess? How long?
Are you talking about the turbine or the dam itself?
No, sorry, I have moved you for a second back to our previous turbines, talking about the steam turbines and the gas turbines. How long do you think we use them for? How long do you think we use these power stations for? When you build a power station that relies on a gas turbine or on a steam turbine, how long do we use it for?
Maybe 60 years.
At a very maximum, yeah. That 60 years is, is an extreme case. Normally, we would retire it in about 30, in about 40 years, something like that. If we are desperate to keep it running, maybe 45, maybe 50 years at most. 60 years is very rare for power stations to last. And typically, if it's 60 years, you normally keep it in the system as a backup power station. You try not to use it too much because it's probably going to break down at any minute. So that's the typical design you will have. That's a typical lifespan you would expect. And the same goes for nuclear power stations, which are steam turbines power stations. Again, more than 40 years, 45 becomes really tricky. Most of the initial most of the initial nuclear power stations we built had a predicted lifespan of around 35 to 40 years. We tend to extend it because we simply cannot afford to shut them down when we need the energy. But there are question marks over how safe that is and how a good idea that is in practice. But you don't see them really going above 50 years. It's not really something that you see a lot of. Now with hydropower stations, you see them going on for more than that. Yeah, you see them going on for even 100 years. We have power stations which are from the early 19th century and they're still running. So they last a lot longer. The only big question is the reliability of water supply. So as we're moving into a period of more and more intense climate change, a very tough question is, will you actually have enough water? If you build a large hydropower system now, can you really rely on it for 100 years? Will you have water in 100 years in that area? Who knows? So there is a lot of climate forecasting and weather forecasting that might be put into place into these power stations. And for some areas, your forecast might be that you will have more water, might be more precipitation in that particular area, but it might as well be less. It can happen. And many of the older hydropower stations in South Europe, for example, now, I'm thinking of Greece here in particular, they do seem to gradually produce less and less over the years because there is lower precipitation in some parts of the world. But in others, you see exactly the opposite. So in other places, you see a lot more rainfall, and that is, in some ways, that is actually worse because from an energy standpoint, okay, you can produce more energy, but it's also, a lot more scary in terms of damages on the dam and in terms of potential for flooding and so on. So it can be a lot more tricky. Have you got any questions for hydro? Because some of you are also working on hydro, isn't it?
Professor, I guess I have one question.
Sure.
A big problem with hydro in recent years in the United States has been environmental groups, particularly those focused on fish migration, on other species and the effects on rivers. Have we seen that in Europe as well, where there's a movement in the United States, especially they've started tearing down many dams, even though they are a pretty reliable source of power because of ecological concerns? Is that the same in Europe?
Correct, yes. So there are a few things. Let me begin by saying that with every large infrastructure project, you will have ecological damages. there is no chance that you will build something as large as a hydropower station and the ecosystem around it will stay unaffected. Forget it. It will probably have significant impacts. What these impacts are, you can name them. One thing is fish migration. That's a standard one. So you will have fish populations which, if they have to go through through a turbine, that's not a good thing. You might chop them a little bit. So that's a problem. You also, even more in some places, which is I think what Fred was talking about, some places you will have the actual issue of fish migration, at which certain fish populations swim upwards on river. I mean, I'm thinking now North American, Alaska and Canada areas where salmon migration happens. So you genuinely see salmon fishing up the rivers to go up at a high elevation and leave their eggs there. They lay their eggs there, and then they let down on the river and go down again. It's pretty insane if you actually see that. I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen it. I found myself in Alaska a few years ago, like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and you really see fish jumping out of the water and keep swimming up, and they're exhausted, of course, at the end. It's really, really shocking to see that as a thing that actually happens at scale. And that's where the bears fish as well. They come there and they literally can catch fish because fish are so exhausted and they're jumping out, so you literally can see it in front of you. You could catch a fish like that with your hands. It's really weird. So such populations, if you have a dam there, how are they going to go up? So you do create various types of ecological impacts, and that's not really the only one. Yeah. So with large hydropower stations, you will potentially need to relocate people from where the lake is now. Maybe in the past there was a village, there was a settlement, there were houses, there were other things there. Probably there was no lake. That is the fact. Yeah, there was something else there, there was a valley of some sort, which has now been flooded. So that's another thing. Certain people will lose their land. They can be compensated, but not everything is money in that sense. For certain people, losing their land has a very significant value, which is not monetary. Or at the same time, you will flood certain amounts of biomass. So trees, grass, whatever is there, you will put it under the water. And as a result, it will decompose. As a result, to produce a lot of methane. So you will see a lot of methane bubbles coming out of that. Not immediately, it will take years. But there will be a methane production coming out of flooding a certain area. You can also create other more profound changes because that particular part of the land was not supposed to be holding a lake. And a lake is a lot of weight, a very significant weight, which can cause depressions of the land, which can cause landslides, can cause all sorts of things in the area. So again, the regional ecosystem will have to change. It's not a trivial thing. It's a significant one. You would have significant damages, with pretty much every type of power station. Hydro tends to be, even larger because the geography is larger, and typically you have these hydropower stations built in natural locations. So, you feel the damage a lot more. Okay? So it feels like you're industrializing nature in a way. That is the main accusation. It is a problematic issue. I'm not. It's difficult to defend it. The only thing I would say is that as a society, we need to choose how we produce our energy. And there is no way to produce energy without any damages. So, and the damages are not always comparable. That's the main problem, I think. So, with hydro, you have all the things we discussed about. With coal, you will have carbon dioxide emissions going up, causing severe climate change. With nuclear, you need to deal with nuclear waste. Which one is worse? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure if you ask different people, they will give you different answers. It's not a particularly easy thing to prioritize and say that is dangerous and that isn't, or that is nice and that isn't. It's not a particularly easy thing. But it's important to keep in mind that if we still need the energy, and we do, as it seems, then we will have some impacts. It takes, I think it's important societally to have these conversations and try to realize where where impacts can be minimized and what types of energy and what types of designs we can have to really reduce these impacts, because I mean they're not trivial, and like I said, for some people they mean a lot more. Like personally, when I see a hydropower plant, I love it. I like the nature around it. I like to see the lake. I like to see all of that. Yeah. So personally, I love them, but I didn't have my village flooded there, so I haven't had any negative impacts out of it. So it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. My opinion is not necessarily reflective of everyone else, and the fact that only very few people complain doesn't necessarily mean that we should minimize their views. Yeah, we should try to understand the problems and improve them where possible. So yeah, that's that. It's a tricky one. Any other comments on hydro? Which countries have a lot of hydro, do you know?
Brazil, China.
Canada.
Canada, yes.
Maybe.
Which one?
I said that maybe Canada.
Maybe Canada, correct. Yeah, no, Canada definitely does. Brazil does. Which one?
China.
China has some enormous hydropower stations, yes.
I think
France.
the
Netherlands.
I'm hearing France, and what else?
Austria.
Austria.
Netherlands.
Correct. What was that? The last one?
The Netherlands.
Nah, Netherlands is very flat for that. Let me explain this a little bit, because maybe it's not clear to you. To build large hydropower dams, you need significant water flows and high elevation, because these are the two things that you're banking on. Yeah, when you want to produce a lot of electricity from these power stations. So the Netherlands is really so flat that the likelihood of generating a lot of electricity from it, even if there was significant water flow, is very limited. It's similar to the UK. In the UK, I mean, apart from Scotland and a little bit of the Wales area, it's quite hard to produce a lot of electricity from hydropower, unfortunately. Or in Germany, again, Germany doesn't have a very large capacity for hydro. Unlike, for example, somebody mentioned before, Austria. In Austria, hydro is a very big deal. And in Switzerland, it's exactly the same, a very big deal. Why is that the case? Because you have very significant mountains which hold significant amount of water. You can have very high altitude reservoirs, which then allow you to store a lot of energy there. So I mean, it's very proportionate. I don't know if you understand that. You can have, say, X cubic meters, X thousand cubic meters of water at elevation difference of 1,000 meters. You will need to double the amount of water that you have if you halve the amount of height differential that you have. Yeah, so it's a proportionate relationship. It's exactly, if you double the one, you half the other to have the same amount of energy stored there. So high altitude really does a lot of, it helps significantly. The other thing that helps a lot is countries that have significant winter snowpack. So where you have a lot of snow accumulation in winter, that helps quite a lot, because that doesn't flood your lake rapidly. So really, one of the dangers with these things, with these types of energy, was when you have a rapid concentration of water that hits your dam and requires you to do something with it to use it. So floodplains are not particularly good for that. When you have a slow snowpack that melts gradually in spring and summertime and releases water slowly, that is ideal for hydro production, because the water flows into your lake, you take it down to your generator and you let it flow normally at normal speeds, at normal periods. That's the safest way of using it, which is also a major concern as we're moving forwards. And the European glaciers in Austria and in Switzerland are disappearing. Yeah, so that is one of the main concerns in Central Europe for hydropower production right now. So yeah, we have a few countries that rely quite a lot on it. I don't know if anybody mentioned Norway. Did somebody mention Norway? So Norway relies on hydro almost 100%. It's the main source of electricity generation as well. So we have a few countries that really use a lot of hydro power around the world, and these are the geographical characteristics that really invite for a lot of hydro. Typically, countries that have a lot of hydro are capable of providing managing very well relationships between hydro and other types of renewables. So if, for example, I don't know, Portugal, which again is enormous, has about 50% of its electricity comes from hydro. So if Portugal wants to install tons of wind power, it can quite easily cope with it and all the fluctuations of wind because it has a lot of hydro. So it can balance out electricity production at any given time with all of this readily available resource that is hydro. Yeah. So that's that hydro typically brings more renewables. It's quite easy to handle more renewables if you have a lot of hydro. The other thing to keep in mind is that hydro typically also allows countries to get better interconnected with neighboring countries and have this kind of relationship where they provide other countries with a lot of energy when other countries don't have it. For example, to give you a typical story here, there are periods of the year where, because of significant rainfall, or when the snow melts quite rapidly, say in the warmer parts of the summer in June or whenever, you produce too much energy. You need to do something with it. You need to be able to export it. So these countries typically, for some part of the year, they become energy exporters. And then in other parts of the year, they can have agreements with neighboring countries to claim their energy back, to trade some of that energy back through commercial agreements. So again, that's an interesting, situation where some countries can find themselves into. But also one thing for us to keep in mind is that besides all the previous drawbacks that I've mentioned about hydropower, one more to keep in mind on is potential danger for flooding. And this is not trivial. This is very significant. So those of you who are from Italy, you might know the story. I don't remember the name now. There was a...
Vajont.
Yes, that's the one. A significant accident. Actually, I think it's still the largest hydropower accident that has ever happened, I believe. Who wants to say the story? Does anybody know the story? Can share it?
I don't know the story, but it's pretty famous. So
okay. So the story. It's not really a detailed story that I know of, but what really has happened is you have the case there of a high altitude dam that has been located pretty directly above a village. So there's a village downstream and a dam up on the hill. That all sounds good. Good. Kind of scary, but it's all right. It happens all the time with hydropower stations. Now, what is tricky in such an installation is that you start filling the dam with water, and if everything goes well, there's no problem. It keeps running and it's fine. But there are various things that can go wrong with a dam. And most of us immediately are thinking, well, if it rains too much and there is a lot of water filling your reservoir from the nearby mountains, then there is a danger that your dam might might topple. You know, you might have water flowing over your dam. Is that possible? What do you reckon? Can water flow over your dam? Is that okay?
No, because the dam would burst before you'd ever get to that point, right?
So you have all sorts of weird things happening there. Let me show you again this picture. So typically dams will have an overflow spillway. Yes, so somewhere around here at that height. Do you see my mouse cursor?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Around that height, you will have an overflow slide. Yes, so you will have water already when it reaches somewhere there about a couple of meters below the dam's top. The water will start overflowing. That sounds good and it's very useful, but in reality, it might not be enough. So it might be that even though you have that overflow, that's not enough to drive out as much water as you'd hope to drive out. So you might still have too much water coming into your reservoir. So you could in reality end up in situations where water starts overtopping your dam. Now, when that starts happening, forget it, there's no dam anymore. The dam is going to go down. In fact, as your colleague has said, there's every likelihood the dam will go down before that happens. But when water starts going over the top of your dam, imagine suddenly there is an eroding force of flowing water touching that upper part of your dam. What that does is it starts breaking it. Gradually, it starts smashing it. So you start having little pieces of stones, little pieces of elements of the concrete barrier there coming down, washed down. And gradually, that will take down bigger pits and bigger pits until it takes down everything and there is no dam anymore. That doesn't take long, mind you. When the erosion of the dam starts, it's a matter of hours until there is no dam at all. Hours if we're lucky. It can be even faster. Even with the spillways, even with the overflow spillways, you can have exactly the same. Because mind you, you build the spillways, and like we said before, many of these dams are ancient. They're decades old. Often we don't exactly know how well maintained they are. We don't really know their emergency systems. Are they actually fit for purpose? And what fit for purpose means? They were designed 100 years ago. What the situation today, environmentally speaking, is a different planet, is a different world. So you do see spillways sometimes. It has happened. I think it was a few years ago we saw, there were very televised events, in California, even on a dam. I don't remember the name now of that dam. That, you could see the spillway gradually overflowing and gradually being broken apart. There were pieces of the spillway just flowing down together with the water, threatening gradually to end up in a situation where the whole dam will be compromised. Now, why are we so worried for a dam, being compromised? What's the problem with that? If a dam is compromised, what's going to happen downstream?
There is a huge amount of water that may fall on the valley, and if there is a village next to it, it may result in many casualties, like in the Vaillant case.
Correct. So the main issue is flooding downstreams, and we tend to build villages close to water, close to rivers. That traditionally has been the reason, because waterways were the main commerce routes before roads existed. Yeah. The faster routes we had for trade were through rivers. So most, of the historical villages and all of that, they're built next to rivers. So when you have a situation with a dam overflowing and the reservoir suddenly being released, you will have massive floods downstream. Now, mind you, that this normally happens when the reservoir is full. Yeah, it doesn't happen when the reservoir is empty. So you have a lot of water flowing downstream. So it's extremely dangerous. And it can hit villages, not just, 5-6 miles away from the dam, but hundreds of miles away from the dam. it can go a long way. It can have damages, downstream for a very significant length of the river system downstream. The other thing is the time it takes. It can be a number of, a few minutes to a few hours before villages downstream at a significant distance get totally destroyed. And the water pressure there is not a joke. It's that level of water that you have that can wash houses away. It takes everything. There's no, nothing stopping it if that starts happening. So that means it claims many lives. Particularly if that happens in times when there is little warning, so you don't manage to evacuate villages, then there's very little chance anybody would survive, which is what happened at that particular case we're talking about in Italy. I think it claimed, from memory now, was it almost 2,000 people? I don't really remember. It was a very large number of casualties. It's a very significant case of a relatively small accident.
Yeah, I know that it happened by night.
Yes,
so
exactly.
The entire village was all covered, so everybody died.
Yes.
Because it was by night. Yeah.
Professor, can I say something? Because I saw a documentary some years ago, and the point on the Vaillon Dam, it was that the dam didn't fall apart.
No, the dam is still there. It was a landslide.
Yeah, a landslide, and it was so huge, the part of mountain that fell on the water, that it created such a massive wave. And I think the casualties was between 2,000 and 3,000 people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very important point that your colleague has just made. The dam didn't fail there. The dam is still there. It's not operational. They don't use it for anything other than just a visiting site. But the dam didn't fail. What happened was a landslide in the lake had enough of soil falling inside the water, inside the lake, that caused a significant wave, and the wave toppled the dam and flooded the village downstream. So it's totally insane if you think about it. That's crazy. The dam is still there. The water in the reservoir stayed in the reservoir. Just a small amount of water flew outside, and that was enough to kill so many people. So that's the kind of, let's say, scary story that you can have out of hydropower. It's very similar to the scary story that you might get from a nuclear power accident, where you don't hear immediately. Of course, the deaths from nuclear power accidents are a bit of a contested story, and there's a lot of literature about how many people actually die from a nuclear power accident and so on. But equally, the catastrophe that you can get is of similar scary magnitude. Now, a final thing I wanted to talk to you about when it comes to hydropower is, what do we use dams for? Is it just for electricity, or do we use them for other things as well?
Maybe to store water for dry season when it's needed for cultivations. I know that in Egypt they were planning to build dams, and there were problems with neighboring countries and regions, because that would be problematic for others, for other countries not being able to control the flow of the water.
That's very true. Okay, so give this a little bit of a think here. When it comes to building dams and blocking waterways and all of that, water is not just an energy resource. It is energy production is just one small thing that we do with water. For most countries, water is seen as an agricultural resource. So it's a resource that you will store up there for as much as you can store it, and you will use it later on to allow for the production production of agricultural goods. So imagine at a dry period, when farmers might need water, that is when you can let the water flow down into the valley, and farmers can use it for irrigation. So that's an enormous issue. Equally, if you have a very large reservoir, you can prevent flooding. So you can have a buffer zone for water that doesn't flow directly into the valley, flooding everything, but a significant amount of that water stays up there on the reservoir and is then flowing down, gradually more in a more, easy way, so it doesn't create enormous flooding. So it's flooding control, it's agriculture, and energy. All of these things are of equal importance. And in some countries, I would even say that the agricultural part, takes prominence. There are, recorded papers in the literature that show in certain countries about 70 to 80% of water use from dams. Essentially, the decision making is about agricultural needs, not about energy needs. So don't think of it as an energy decision only. It can be a lot more than just energy. Final thought, which again touches on what your colleague mentioned, is that water resources are very often shared between countries. So again, when a country builds a dam, and that dam was normally blocking, is now blocking the flow of a river that goes into the next country, for example, it means that that country suddenly controls the flow of that river to the next country. Now, I'll show you if I can very, very rapidly. Let me see if I can do that. If I were to open a map here with Ethiopia, let me see if I can do that. So I'm hoping to be able to show you very, very briefly. You see, my geography is not that good. So I was hoping to show you the Nile River's springs. Yeah, so there's an area in Ethiopia where the Nile River begins. And I think it might be the Blue Nile Falls area. Let me see, am I making this up? That might be quite true. Okay, so if I share my screen with you, here it is. So I'll go from here. Can you all see my screen now? Yeah, do you see the map?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So I know it's already time for you to go, but let me keep you for another second here just to show you. So about here, yeah, that's the Blue Nile River. Do you see this area here, this stuff, yeah? So this area broadly is the spring of the Nile River. And you begin, we're now in Ethiopia. This is the Ethiopian area. And Nile goes through Sudan, and then through Sudan it flows to Egypt. We all connect in our heads the Nile River with Egypt. But in reality, Nile begins a lot before Egypt. It begins in Ethiopia. Ethiopia right now is building one of the largest African hydropower plants. It's in the process of building it. I think they will very soon, or have they already started, filling the dam with water. So essentially, they're blocking flows of water downstream to Sudan and Egypt. So imagine, that's insane. Egypt's view is that they will have to go on war with Ethiopia because they cannot tolerate another country controlling the flows of Nile River into their land. Nile is so important for Egypt. Their view is, we will bomb your dam. There's no way we're letting this there. What will happen eventually, we will see. We don't know. But I'm going to tell you how important it can be for certain countries. From Ethiopian point of view, it's our river here, sorry. We can produce enormous amounts of electricity from it if we put a dam here, and we can control water supply in our areas and irrigate and do all of that. A couple of countries later, after Sudan into Egypt, it's casus belli. It's a reason for war. That happens because for them it's seen as a huge damage. For Sudan, it's middle of the road. Part of Sudan's think that really that is not too bad for them because it might control flooding, which is something that Sudan has been suffering quite a lot from. But yeah, it's the geopolitics of hydropower are not trivial at all. They're really, really big business. So with that in mind, with that thought, I'm going to let you go. I know I kept you a little bit more than I should. So have a good afternoon. I'll talk to you on Wednesday about probably a few more turbines. If you can stand me talking about turbines again, I hope you will, and I hope I'm going to see you on Wednesday. Talk to you soon. Bye,
Professor.
Thank you.
We can't hear you anymore, Professor. Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
Can you not hear me anymore?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, now. Okay, sorry, it was just my connection.
No problem. Okay.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Prof. Can you read the chat, please?
I am.
There is this Alma Fest going on the 11th of October. Were you aware of this? Because
no, Alma Mater Fest. I see it now.
Sorry,
I don't know anything about it. No.
Because they know there are no learning activities on this day.
Ah. Okay. Okay. So, and that is next Monday, yeah?
Yeah. Just a second. I can send the link.
Okay. You see, I'm now wondering if I have received an email in Italian because I cannot read them. I have no idea what they say. So maybe somebody sent me an email about that, and I have never seen it.
I'm sorry, Professor. I read that it's from 4 p.m. and actually we have lesson until 3 p.m. So I don't think it's a problem for us.
Okay.
But
But it's for the first year students, I think. So I don't know they can attend to the class or not. I think we should check it with the coordinator of the program.
Okay, so what I'll do, I mean, if you want to, that probably is going to be the most helpful. If one of you can send an email to Ilaria, Ilaria will probably know what's the answer.
Yeah, but I think the first year students should do this because the second years, this is not for them, you know, we can attend to the class. There's no problem for us.
Okay. Okay. I mean, nobody has told me anything about it, but to be honest, it happened to be in other years that there was also, you know, a local celebration that the university was closed for or things like that. And often we had to make plans for these things at the last minute. So maybe I will send an email to Ilaria and ask her. Don't worry about it. I'll do it now.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll talk to you on Wednesday then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.